Hello and welcome, Crosstown Gamer here, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to set up and how to play A Distant Plain, Insurgency in Afghanistan, which is Volume 3 in GMT's Coin series. Now this is part of a longer series of videos where I'm going to be covering each of the coin games and doing a playthrough of each and every coin game solo versus the bots. So I'll be playing solo versus the bots in this playthrough. And if you enjoy this type of content, be sure to check out the already completed series I have for 3 of the other coin games, volumes 1, 2, and 6, or Andean Abyss, Cuba Libre, and Falling Sky. I'm not going in any particular order here, but I am doing this one next due to a request from a user. So, with all of that preamble out of the way, let me teach you how to play this game. I'm not going to assume that you have watched any of my other videos. I'm not going to assume you have any coin knowledge already, but hopefully this will be instructive as a general overview of how to play the game. I won't go through every single rule. Some of these things we are just going to encounter naturally as we play, but so it goes. This is the board, the map, and I have it set up for the short scenario here. I found that if I do the longer scenarios, then the videos go on forever unless I lose prematurely, which has happened before. So I'm doing the short video so you can get a good sense of how to play this wonderful game. And I'll consider at a later date, once I'm done with all of the videos, doing one of the longer scenarios as well. So anyway, this is a coin game, and it should look familiar to you if you have played any of the other coin games as well. They all have a very distinct look about them. But this one is Insurgency in Afghanistan, so the map that we're looking at here is going to be Afghanistan. And the game is typically a 4-player game, but if you don't have 4 players, or you're playing it solo, so you definitely don't have 4 players, the game comes with some flowcharts which you can use to simulate other players as well. So I'm going to be utilizing those heavily since I'm playing against those bot flowcharts for the other 3 factions. But let me take you through what each of the factions are in this game and kind of what their goals are. And then I'll dive into what the map is broken up into, what the pieces are, and then we're going to transition to the actual flow of game, the sequence of play, and the cards, and basically the heart and soul of what makes a coin a coin. So the 4 factions that are included in this game are going to be the coalition forces, which are effectively the United States. Their goal in this is to garner support in Afghanistan, support for the government, and then withdraw, completely get out of Afghanistan and go back home. That's their goal, and that's how they're going to win. And I'll get more precise on what exactly that means in game terms when we talk a little bit more about how to play and what those terms mean. The next faction that is available to play is the government forces, and they have a couple of different colored pieces, but this is the Afghani government, and they are also so the coalition is a counter-insurgent faction, or a coin faction, and the government is also a counter-insurgent faction. So that's going to be markedly different than the next faction, which is the Warlords. And the Warlords are going to try to get uncontrolled population, and they want to get rich. They want a lot of resources. Essentially, they're selling opium and weapons and things like that. So the Warlords are concerned with sowing the seeds of chaos, I guess, and getting rich famously rich in the process. These are considered an insurgent faction. So we have the counter-insurgent factions, and then we have insurgent factions. The next faction and the final faction is going to be the Taliban. And all they care about is opposition to the government. So they want opposition on the map, and they want a lot of bases on the map. That's how they're going to... That's their overall goal. And you don't have to memorize all of those right out the gate. I will make sure to remind you of what each faction is going for as the game goes on. So those are the 4 factions that are going to be playing. I'm going to be playing as the Coalition, because effectively they're the United States, and I'm American, so I just felt, why not represent the place that I'm from? And so, yeah, I'll be playing as Coalition, and then the other 3 factions are going to be simulated via the flowcharts. If we take a look at the map, so this is Afghanistan. That's the darker colored region on the map. And then these lighter colored regions around are some of the surrounding countries. So we have Pakistan, we have Tajikistan, we have Uzbekistan, we have Turkmenistan, we have Iran. And so most of the action is going to take place in Afghanistan, though. The exception to that is there's going to be some action happening in Pakistan as well. And we'll get to that shortly. Afghanistan is broken up into these different irregular-sized regions on the map, and these are called provinces. I might call them provinces, I might call them departments, I might call them regions. If you've played other coin games, you'll know that they are called a variety of different things. So I'll try to stick to provinces since that's what they're called. But if I slip up, then just know that those are interchangeable terms. And there's a few different types of provinces based on the terrain. So we have mountainous regions here, we have plains here, and these are all in the legend on the side. We've got mountains, plains, and then Pashtun and Pakistan. So the Pashtun provinces are these ones that have, the provinces that have green text. So tends to be in the southern and eastern areas. And then in the north, we have the white text here, and those are non-Pashtun regions. Those have an effect for certain events, certain operations, and so those are just distinguished by the different colored text there. But they're essentially the same type of space. They're just a region on the map, and each region on the map, or each province, is going to have some information on it, some bits of information. It'll have the name. It will have, which, by the way, I know I'm going to mispronounce probably all of these names. I don't speak the language, unfortunately. I'm a lover of languages, but I'm not trying to offend anyone. I love everyone, so bear with me as I totally butcher all of the pronunciation. But it's got the name here. It's got a couple of boxes to mark control, who controls the region, and whether or not it's in support or in favor of the government, or in opposition or neutral. So there's a couple of markers that, show support or opposition and control, and any regions without those markers are considered uncontrolled or neutral. So it's got boxes for those. It's got this box here with a number in it, and that represents the population of the province. And the population goes from 0 on up to, I believe 3 is the highest. And so what those are is effectively actually like multipliers for a score. Each faction's trying to do different things, but those get multiplied by the population of the province to contribute to the score of that particular faction, whether it's, control or support or anything like that. So the players and the bots tend to want to go for the higher population areas, as those are going to contribute more to their score. And you also have spots for bases here. There's 2 spots in each province to put a base. That's the stacking limit. You can't have more than 2 bases. In some coin games, there are certain events which allow you to go over the stacking limit in very rare cases, but I don't believe this is one of those. I'm not sure. I'm not super fluent with the full deck of cards here to know if there's an event that does that. But just remember that anywhere on the map, there's a limit of 2 bases. So those are the provinces. Then you also have these, so most provinces are bordered by this white line, and that's just a boundary between 2 regions, or 2 provinces. But there's also these road markers here. And the roads have a number in a circle on them. These are called lines of communication. They are present in probably at least half of the coin games out there. I think they're a staple of the coin design. But Cuba Libre doesn't have them, and Falling Sky doesn't have them. There's probably other ones that don't have them too. I'm just off the top of my head, I'm having difficulty going through each one right now. But lines of communication can facilitate travel, so pieces can move faster along the roads than they might otherwise normally move, and based on the operation that you're doing. And then they have these numbers in them, and that represents the economic value of the line of communication. And that economic value is going to contribute, it's going to help contribute to the government resources. So the counter-insurgent factions want to protect the roads so that they can get more resources, and the insurgent factions, the Taliban and the Warlords, they want to sabotage the roads so that the government misses out on those resources. And then you have these little black dots, and these are called towns. They don't really serve any function in this game other than just, I want to say historical, but that's the wrong word, geographic landmarks. They're over here in the legend as well, but you can't put pieces in them. They don't really serve any purpose other than orienting you to the geography of Afghanistan. So then we have also this circle, this big circle in the map, and this is called a city. And some coin games have more cities than others. There might be a bunch of cities. A Distant Plain just has the one, and it's Kabul. And a city is essentially the same as a province because it's got spots for bases. It can be controlled. It can have support or opposition, and it also has a population value here. And the city is really important because it has the highest population of all the outlying areas, so it will contribute the most to any faction's victory conditions or points based on whether it's supported or controlled by that faction. So we'll want to focus our attention on the cities a lot, but they are very similar in nature to the outlying provinces. The difference is that some operations that the factions are going to do are only going to be able to be done in the cities, or they're only going to be able to be done in the provinces, or they're only going to be done on lines of communication. And sometimes it's a mix, but you just have to be careful whether an event card or an operation tells you to do it in a specific type of region on the map, then you got to make sure it's in that particular region. So the surrounding countries are non-occupiable. You can't occupy them, anything outside of this yellow border. However, there is an exception to that, and that's in Pakistan. The Taliban forces are actually able to reside or to have presence there, but the other factions are not. So it's kind of a safe haven for the Taliban in Pakistan. Okay, I think that's everything that's just on the map. So let's talk about the different types of pieces that are going to be, they're different shaped pieces. So what do they mean and how are they different from each other? That kind of thing. So the insurgent factions have, so the Warlords and the Taliban have these octagonal cylinders, and these are called guerrillas. And they represent, the fighting force of the Taliban, and they have two sides. Every guerrilla, regardless of faction, has two sides. It has an underground side, which has no symbol on it, or has this embossed side, which is active or above ground or exposed. You can think of it like that. So underground and exposed. Those are the two states that a guerrilla can be in, and different operations can only be done by underground guerrillas, or only be done by active guerrillas, or only done to active guerrillas. So you have to pay attention to whether they're flipped, right side up or upside down. There's also these circular discs, and these are called bases. In some coin games, they might have a different name. For example, the Syndicate in Cuba Libre, which was the green faction, they had these circular discs too, but they were called casinos. In this game, they're all bases. So every faction has bases, and you can see from their available forces, as you start pulling bases off the map here, then it'll tell you how many bases are on the map currently. So the Taliban have 9 bases on the map because that's the highest exposed number. That's important because they want more bases on the map to win. The bases are good for rallying, for putting more troops on the map, for protection, because a lot of the rally operations are dependent on the population plus the number of bases you have there, and that's how many troops or guerrillas you can put in to a province, rather than just a single guy. So the bases are good. It allows you to put more pieces on the map quickly, and time is of the essence in this game for sure. You never feel like you have enough time to accomplish all of your goals. Okay, so those are all the different pieces that the Insurgent Factions would have. They have guerrillas and they have bases. The Counter-Insurgent Factions have a similar type of piece. They have cubes instead of these cylinders, and the cubes represent troops, at least for the coalition. I'm using my arm here, and I'm sure I'm going to mess up just like mashing pieces together. I'll try to be more delicate. So the coalition has troops, and that's their forces. They don't have a active or underground side. They're all the same. And then they also have bases here. The government faction has bases as well. They only get 3 of them though. And then they have 2 different colored cubes. And the dark cubes are called troops, and the light cubes are called police. And they are both, government pieces that are capable of doing operations and whatnot. But the troops are better at rooting out underground guerrillas and then assaulting and like removing pieces from the board, whereas the police need to be in spaces in order for you to buy civic actions and get support, or so they have slightly different purposes, but both the blue pieces belong to the government, and we'll see their differences as we go along. And yeah, I think that's all the actual pieces on the map that go there. And we also have a couple of tracks around the map. So we have the Islamabad track, which starts in the backing, and depending on where this marker is, there's a different effect that can be in play, and it'll tell you what it is underneath. And this can actually also be flipped to hard, and that has a certain effect. It starts out normal though, and so the current effect is that Talibans can rally and march to and from Pakistan, and it'll cost them 0 resources. So normally it costs resources to rally and it costs resources to march, but if they're to and from Pakistan, then it's free for them right now. What else? We also have returnees up here. These are little markers that have a +1 on them, and they can be added to a province. There's some already on the map here, and these add to the population value that's already there. So effectively, Kabul has a population of 4 right now, and Baghlan has a population of 3. So there are 6 of those markers, and so you'd want to add or subtract from the population so that you can get more points, in regions that you control or whatever. So those are important as well. The next bit of track that we have to explain is this numbered track that goes all the way around the top and right edge of the board. It goes up to 75. This is a multi-purpose track. So one of the things that it tracks are these cylinders, and that is resources for each faction. So the Taliban, the black pieces, have 15 resources at the start. The Warlords have 20, and so on. The government has 30, and the coalition doesn't. You'll notice they don't have a marker up there, and that's because for their operations, they end up using the government's resources. So kind of a little thematic fun. The next thing are these cardboard chit markers, and these are tracking the progress each faction has toward their overall goal and how they win the game. So the Warlords want uncontrolled population, for example, and currently they're at 13. As provinces gain or lose control, then this is going to slide up and down. And there are these nice color-coded sections of the track here that represent the threshold that each faction needs to cross in order to be in contention for winning. So if the Warlords were to get up to 16 uncontrolled population, then they'd be in contention for winning the game. They also need their resources to be over 40. So they have a dual purpose thing. But for example, support plus available, this is for the coalition, if the amount of support on the board plus the amount of available troops they have changes, this can go up and down. And if it reaches 31, then the coalition will be in contention for winning the game. So you can see the other two. Well, we have the Taliban's opposition plus bases here. We have this patron here, patronage, that's tracked, and this can go up and down, and it directly impacts the coin plus patronage. This is the government's goal. So as this moves, it will move this as well. But yeah, the government's trying to get to 36. That's those markers up there. That's all I want to talk about right now. There's still these capabilities on the map. I want to explain that. Oh no, and then the last thing is there are these two overflow boxes, one on the other side of the map and this one, A and B. You can put these out on the map and then put all the pieces in the box, because sometimes these boxes or the regions can get really crowded with a lot of pieces. So that's just a nice place to put everything that you want to do. Okay. So, let's talk about the sequence of play, how you actually play the game. Now that we know all of what's out there, how do we go about playing this thing? Well, coin games, almost all of them share the same kind of track here, the sequence of play track. There are a couple of exceptions to that, and that's the ones that don't involve 4 players. So All Bridges Burning has a slightly different track, and Colonial Twilight has a slightly different track. Everywhere else has essentially the same identical track here. And coin games are played through cards. It's not a true like card-driven game because you don't have a hand of cards, but there will be 2 cards that are visible at any one particular time. There's the card that's being played, and then the card that's on deck or like next up. And I'll show you what these cards look like. For the short scenario, I did have to pull out some cards, so we're not using these cards in the deck. So you're not supposed to actually look at these, but since I'm not familiar with every single card in the deck, it's not going to be super game-breaking if I'm like, well, I know that this card's not going to be in the deck, because I don't even know what they do half the time. So I'll show you what these cards look like. And again, there will be one, well, of course, these are the propaganda cards. I'll explain those in just a second. There will be one card always that's being played, and then the current card. I guess there's actually a spot for it here, event card. We'll see where I end up putting it. This is the card that's being played, and then there will be the card that's like next up on deck. So there are 2 types of cards. There's event cards, which look like this most of the time. They're very similar. And then there's also these propaganda cards. There's 4 of these in this deck, mostly evenly spaced, but not exactly. They're shuffled into 4 different piles and stacked one on top of the other. When we encounter a propaganda card, there's this whole other... We pause the action on the board, and we go through this whole other track to see... you know, has anybody won the game yet? You can only win during these propaganda cards. So if you cross your point threshold, you don't automatically just win. You have to actually hold on to it to the next propaganda card to be able to claim victory. And then, you know, we're going to get some more resources. And I'm going to go through this as we encounter it. It's a big, long, you know, process. And then we go back to event cards. So the event cards are going to be what I want to show you the most, I think. They're going to be most beneficial to see how this works. So event cards have about 4 different bits of information on here that you need to be concerned about. At the top, we have these 4 different symbols, and there's one symbol for each faction. So we have the Coalition, the Warlords, the Taliban, and the government, and you'll notice that the order is different on each of these cards. This represents the order in which the factions will become eligible and be able to take actions and operate and do events and things like that. So for this card, the Coalition's up first, then the Warlords, then the Taliban, then the government. So then you have, this is the order of initiative, I guess, and then you have a picture, you have the name of the card, and then some events have split text like this, a top and a bottom, unshaded and a shaded. These 2 cards do. Sometimes it'll just be one big block of text, and it's just, that's the event card. For the split up ones, you can if you choose to take the event, you can either play the top or the bottom, the shaded or the unshaded. And the shaded ones tend to benefit the Insurgent Factions, so Taliban and Warlords, and then the coin factions are benefited, the Coalition and the government are benefited by the unshaded version most of the time. I think there are some exceptions, but that's essentially, you have to be creative to find them. Okay, so let's say this card was the first card in the game. How would you actually go about playing the game? Well, it goes something like this. You'd look at the first eligible faction, which is going to be the Coalition. And if this doesn't make sense, there's probably like 70 cards in here. You'll get it by about the second card we do it. So anyway, the Coalition's up first, and they have 4 options. They can go here, 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 or they can pass. And so anyone in this box is considered to be eligible, and the Coalition would go first, and they have the ability to do an operation only with no special activity. They can do an operation with a special activity, or they can do the event. Or if they don't want any of those, they can pass. And when you pass, you get a resource, or you get 3 resources, depending on what it says, and you get to remain eligible. So if for some reason I didn't want to play this card, but I knew I really want to play this card, I might pass, and so I could remain eligible and play that card that's coming up. Or maybe I'm low on resources, I want to pass for that reason. So then the choices then are going to be the event. I can play the event for the text that's provided here, and then I can do an operation either with or without a special activity. And I'll show you what those operations look like here in just a second. So suppose we did play this for the operation plus special activity. We would look at the card again, and it would tell us that the Warlords are the next eligible faction. So then the Warlords, rather than getting 4 options to pick from, they now only have 2 options for actions they can take. They can either follow these arrows and take this box, or they can pass. And they might want to pass because they want to play on the next card or whatever. So if they go here, they can do a limited operation, or they can do the event for the text. A limited operation is just a regular operation, but only limited to one location on the map. Normally when you do an operation, you can do it in as many places as you want, or it'll tell you on the sheet like the maximum of 3 spaces, whatever. But limited operation is just in one spot. So yeah, so that they could do that, or they could play the event. Then when they're done, this card gets discarded, or it just stays there, and we'll play the next card. We adjust the eligibility, which means we take the factions that have played and we slide them to the ineligible side now, and the 2 remaining factions, or 3 or 1 remaining faction, will get a chance to play on the next card. And then the following card will get flipped up, so you can see what's coming up next. Now, for as a corollary to this, you'll notice that basically only 2 factions have the potential to act on any one given card. Factions can pass and whatnot, but only the Warlords and the Coalition got to act on that first card, even though the Taliban and the government were on the card. They didn't get to go because the other factions got first dibs. But then the next card comes up. The first eligible faction is the government. They are eligible, so they get the same 4 choices. Say they chose this. Then the coalition would be up next, but they're ineligible. So then it goes to the Taliban, and they get to pick, and suppose that they pass. Then when we adjust, we discard the card, play the next one. When we adjust eligibility here, the Taliban would get to remain eligible. All the ineligible factions would get to go over to eligible, and then the ones that have played will go to ineligible. So there's this constant cycling of eligibility, which is like really what corresponds or constitutes the meat and potatoes of coin games. There's this push and pull and trying to lock people out of taking certain actions based on what's beneficial to you and you alone. And then we also have this prop card here and marker, and it'll track us as we go through the propaganda stuff. So everyone starts eligible, and they might become ineligible or based on doing events or operations. So what are those? We know what the events look like. Oh, and here's an example of a card that doesn't have split text, just so you can see it. I did want to talk really briefly before I get to the operations and special activities. There are 2 other kinds of events, and they'll have a bit of text right here, and they'll say Taliban or Coalition capabilities. And those are permanent effects. If those get used for their event, then they're in play for the rest of the game. They're like rule breakers for the entire game. There's also like government momentum cards, and those are in effect until the next propaganda card. So they're like semi-permanent events. The reason I want to bring those up now is because in the rules it says the standard way to set up the game is when you pull out. So I pulled out a certain number of cards here that we're not using for the short scenario. And I have to go through them and find all the capabilities that are there and pull them out. And so I've done that here, and these start out the game in play already. So there are 2 Taliban capabilities, and these are permanent game-breaking rules for the Taliban for the rest of the game. And then there were 3 coalition capabilities. So these are different effects that are going to be in effect for the rest of the game that benefit the coalition. So I wanted to point that out. It does say you have the option of not doing that if you want a less complicated game, but I just wanted to play it as intended, I guess. And the scenarios here that I mentioned before, we're doing the short scenario. There's also 2 other scenarios, the main and the extended. I wanted to do the short one because they tend to go on forever when I explain everything to death, probably. But so we're going to do the shorter one here so that this series doesn't end up being like 40 videos long. This will tell you how to prepare the deck of cards, and it'll tell you all of the different spots on which to put the markers that we saw on the resource track, and then it'll go through each and every province and tell you whether or not that has coin control, Taliban control, whether it has troops, bases, polices, etc. So when you get all the way to the bottom of this thing, your board should look like this, and you should be set up and ready to go. And yeah, so we've got our deck of cards here, and then we've just got, these are the pieces set up for the short scenario. Might look a little different than, the setup for the other scenarios, but I'm just going based off of what this chart tells me to do. Okay, so I've covered events in their entirety. I've covered how the sequence of play works, covered the 4 different factions, and now I want to talk about the operations, the different actions that you're able to take. So, excuse me while I fiddle around here. Each coin game comes with four, well, most coin games come with four of these charts here. And they fold out, trying to do this one-handed and failing miserably. They fold out and they have each of the factions on here. And there's one for every player, so there's four of them. And they have all the different actions and special activities, operations and special activities that each of the factions can do. So since we're going to be the coalition, let me briefly explain how these work. We've got operations on the left in the lighter shading, and then we have special activities on the right. So based on which box we choose, we can either do an operation only, or we can add in a special activity as well. The operations, I'm not going to go through each one, but the counter-insurgent operations are very similar, if not identical. So the government and the coalition get train, patrol, sweep, and assault. These are so handy, by the way, so you don't have to constantly look in the rule book. It tells you what the purpose is. So this is going to add forces in, get more troops onto the board. Patrol is going to protect lines of communication. Sweep is going to find the area, the enemy, so it's going to flip pieces from underground to active, and then assault is going to eliminate anyone that is active in regions, or at least give you the chance to do it. So those are the four actions we can do, and we can see that, let me open it up again, the government's coin operations are very similar. Train, patrol, sweep, and assault. There might be some subtle differences about where they can do it, or the procedure exactly, but by and large, they're pretty much the same. So yeah, it'll tell you the purpose, where you're allowed to do it. So the train, you can do it in any province that has a coalition piece, or you can do it in Kabul. And then, patrol could be any line of communication or Kabul, and so on. It'll tell you what the cost is. Some things cost resources. And again, the coalition use the government resources rather than their own. And then it'll tell you the procedure, how to actually go about carrying out the action. Then you get to the special activities side, and these are all different for every faction. So surge, airlift, and airstrike is totally different than the government's, whatever it is. Govern, transport, and eradicate. So those are completely different. And when using this kind of menu of actions here, you're allowed to do any of the operations as long as you're able to do them, like in a location where it's possible to do so. But then you can't just pick any old special activity. There's this like plus, surge, or airlift. So if I train, I'm limited to only doing the surge or the airlift special activity. I cannot airstrike. But patrol, I can airlift or airstrike, but not surge, and so on. And typically these don't cost anything. Sometimes they do. But the cool thing about special activities too is not only is it a bonus action that you can do in addition to your operation, but you can do this at the beginning, first, before you do your operation. You can do it after, or you can actually interrupt your own operation to do the special activity right in the middle of it, which is really cool. You can get pretty fancy with the stuff that you end up doing. The insurgent factions have very similar operations to each other as well. They each have rally, march, attack, and terror. And again, those might work slightly differently, but the difference is very subtle. They're effectively the same. And then they have completely different special activities. We've got extort, infiltrate, and ambush for the Taliban, and something else for the Warlords. Then the last thing I wanted to mention on these menus here is the victory conditions at the bottom. I didn't really go through, I had to do a lot of explanation and exposition just to get to the point where I could explain all of these victory conditions. But coin games are asymmetric by nature, and every faction is trying to do something different, and it's summarized right here. So the coalition wants the total support on the map, so they want these markers, support, to be on the map versus opposition or neutral. And this gets multiplied by the population. So up here we have 3 population plus 1 population is 4 population, and it's in support. So this contributes 4 to the support value of the victory condition for coalition. So the total support plus the available coalition pieces needs to exceed 30. And so we can see that, you know, this is the only spot on the board that has support right now, and we said it contributed 4 to it. And then up here they have 6 pieces in available. That's the lowest number, I guess, that's there. And 6 plus 4 is 10, and that's why that's on 10. So the coalition is essentially trying to garner support across Afghanistan and then withdraw as many pieces as they can to get out. So they're propping up the government for support and then getting out. The Taliban want basically the opposite. They want opposition. So the same calculation, I don't think there's actually any opposition on the map right now, but there are these chits over here amongst, you know, and this is one of them, but the other side says opposition. The calculation is identical to support, but just for the other thing. So they want their total opposition plus all of their bases on the map to exceed 20. So there's no opposition right now, but they have 9 bases on the map. That's why their victory marker is on 9. The government wants all of the spaces to be controlled by coin factions and the patronage to exceed 35. So they have these markers for coin control, and that gets multiplied by the population. So this is a 1, this is a 1, you know, this is a 4. So that's, you know, 1, 2, 6, plus another 3, and so on. You add it all up, and it should total 21, taking the patronage into account. Lastly, the Warlords, they want uncontrolled Afghan population to exceed 15 and have more than 40 resources. So they want spaces that look like this, where it's uncontrolled, and they want lots of resources, getting rich off of selling guns and opium. And yeah, if someone reaches this victory condition throughout the game, and a propaganda card comes up, then they will possibly win right then. But if nobody reaches their victory conditions during a propaganda, then we wait till the last one, and whoever's closest to that goal will win. I think that's all of how the operations work and special activities. The only thing I haven't covered is what it means to be controlled by coin or Taliban. And I'm probably forgetting some other stuff too, which is why we're just going to cross those bridges when we come to them, when we're actually playing the game. So I apologize if I missed something really important in this overview. But regions can either be Taliban controlled, coin controlled, or uncontrolled. So on the back side of these markers are the coin control sides. And the way you calculate control is let's look at a region that doesn't have anybody in it. If you're the only faction, if the Taliban's the only faction in there, they have more pieces than everybody else. So it would be Taliban controlled, and we put a marker down. So in this case, the Taliban don't control this region because they have 2 pieces, and bases count toward this, and everybody else has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total pieces. So since 2 is less than 5, then the Taliban do not have control. Now, coin control it's a little different than most coin games because the coalition and the government are actually working together. So the cubes, basically add up the cubes and the coin-controlled bases, the yellow or mustardy and blue bases, all the pieces for the coalition and government, add those together. And those have to be more than the sum of every other faction. So we have 3 pieces here in Uruzgan, and the other factions have 1, 2, 3, 4. So since 3 is less than 4, the coin don't control it. So since the Taliban don't control it and the coin factions don't control it, then it will be uncontrolled. Whereas up here, the coin factions have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces, and all the other factions just have 1, 2, 3. So since 6 is more than 3, then the coin has control there. Trying to find a region that's uncontrolled, but it's a tie. Yeah, basically if there's a tie though, then it's uncontrolled. But like here, the Taliban have more pieces than everyone else, so it's Taliban controlled. I think that's it. So yeah, that's at least enough to get going. Oh, yeah, okay, I remember now. I did want to mention just 2 other bits of tools we have, or 3 other tools that we have at our disposal. We also have this reference sheet here, which has the sequence of play as well as the propaganda card sequence. And this is what we're going to be using when we encounter our first propaganda card, going through each of these steps one by one and explaining it. I'm not going to explain how it works now, but this is a really nice reference so we don't have to go digging in the rules for what to do there. And then on the back, it's got a list of all the cards, the order in which the factions operate in them, and all the spaces, whether it's Pashtun, non-Pashtun, the type of terrain, etc. So just a nice handy reference. We also have, so the bots in this game sometimes need to select spaces at random. So we have this really cool map where we're going to roll some dice, and then based on the outcome of those dice, it'll pick a region for us. So, you know, say it picks this region here. And if whatever we're doing is impossible in you know, Badghis region, then it would, we follow the arrow and we try that place next, and we try that place next, and we go up and around until we find a viable location. So that's a really cool way to do random space selection, and we're going to probably use this at least semi-frequently. And then lastly, how the bots actually work is that we have these flowcharts. It's in a fold-out similar to the operations fold-out, and it has each faction here. So it's got the Warlords, the government, the coalition, and the Taliban on it, and they each have their own unique set of conditions for choosing specific operations and special activities, or whether they want to do the event, you know, priorities for things. We're not going to be using the non-player coalition because we're going to be playing as the coalition, but everyone else, we're going to determine whether they're going to pass, do the event, or do operations, and we're going to follow these diamonds answering yes or no questions, and then that will tell us whether we're going to do terror or rally or march or attack, and it'll tell us the spaces we need to do them in, and then, you know, once we do those actions, it'll tell us which special activities to do, and so on. So these can be very complicated, and they're definitely daunting for newer players. But I don't know, I found the Cuba Libre and Andean Abyss flowcharts to be pretty straightforward, and the Falling Sky ones took me a long time to figure out how to play them correctly. So hopefully with a distant plane, that these are more akin to the other ones and not the Falling Sky ones, so that it's smooth sailing and I don't make quite so many mistakes. The very last thing I wanted to mention was that in a solo game against all the bots, there's a slightly different win condition and balancing mechanic, because you're not playing against humans, just to make it a little more hard, or like just balanced in general. There's a couple of differences here with the sequence of play and with how you win the game. So for winning the game, I mentioned that if you cross your victory threshold and you hold on to it until any propaganda card, then you win the game. For us, since we're playing against the bots, we actually have to hold on to our victory threshold until the very last propaganda card. So we have to make it through all of them in order to win. Whereas any of the bots, if they meet a victory condition and a propaganda card comes up, then we are going to lose right then. So we have to make it through this whole deck of cards. The bots don't necessarily have to do that. The other balancing mechanic is, you know, say we played an operation in special activity, and a bot was going to play in this square here or this square here, anywhere where it says limited operation, they get to do a full, you know, even here, they always get to do a full operation, not limited, and they get to add in a special activity. So even if we were here, we would only get to do a limited operation just in one spot, no special activity or whatever. But if any bot goes here, they get to do a full operation, full special activity. So just a little way to balance out the bots. And I don't think I'm going to mess that up too often because I've been doing the bots for a while now, and I should. The only time I could foresee it being a problem is if we end up going here. I might just out of habit take a full turn, and I really don't want to do that. So please be sure to call me on any rules mistakes so that I can relearn them and adjust going forward. But I think that's essentially all we need to play this wonderful game. So as I mentioned before, stay tuned for video 2 where we're actually going to start playing this thing. And hopefully that gives you a general overview of all the different, you know, facets to this game. I know it's a long video, and so thanks for sticking with me through to the end. Hopefully I was thorough enough, but without beating a dead horse. So anyway, this has been Crosstown Gamer, and I can't wait to see you in the next video where we're gonna play this thing. Bye.